so I'll just be momentarily late. And then I have to leave at 2:15, so if I get up and leave, don't take it personally. Couple things here. This is a work session, no motions, no votes, and really concerned information is presented, but of course, the board is always clear to ask any questions of the presenters as they see fit. So today, our first item, we have 2 items on a work session today, and then the remainder of the items will be handled at tomorrow night's meeting starting at 7 o'clock. So that, our first item today is to present information regarding the ICE mutual agreement between government and employers program. And with that, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you for having us here today. First off, my name is Paul Osborne. I'm a special agent with U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Immigration Customs Enforcement, Homeland Security Investigations. I'm the image coordinator for SAC Atlanta. With me today is Assistant Special Agent in Charge Robert Andrews, Supervisory Special Agent Drew Clark, and I-9 Auditor Janice Bell. We're here today to answer any questions that you have regarding the image program and about HSI in general. Little background, ICE was formed in 2003 through the merger of the former U.S. Customs Service and the Immigration Naturalization Service following the events of 9/11. In part, all the legacy functions of INS and the U.S. Customs Service fell into one agency. In 2006, they developed the image program, which is primarily what I do. And what that does is kind of streamlines the worksite enforcement component of the Immigration Reform Act of 1986. That act established where businesses and employers were required to fill out the Form I-9, which is an authorization for employment. We ensure compliance through selective audits and investigations. The image program was designed to focus our efforts where they're needed. Critical infrastructure, and egregious violators. We like to work with businesses rather than work against them. So Cobb County is one of our image partners. You have been for a number of years. You've been recertified. In fact, I was able to provide the certification or the image agreement to your HR representatives today. There are some benefits to being an image partner. We work with our partners. We ensure that they're operating in best practices. We ensure that they're completing the Form I-9s, and we provide training and assistance as needed for that. And that's largely what the program is. I've had the opportunity to speak with Commissioner Burrell, and I think at this point, if you have questions with regard to what the program is or how we can be of assistance to you, that's what I'm here for.
Okay, I'll start. First, thank you, Paul, and your team for being here today. When we became image certified back in 2012 as a county, we were saying that it was important to us to be image certified for our employees and hiring practices. We also thought it was important, or some of us thought it was important too, but I think there were a lot of, for the vendors and companies that do business with the county or have contracts with the county to be image certified as well. However, I think there were some misnomers and some information out there that maybe weren't completely true or accurate. And so to bring this back for consideration, I ask that you come today and kind of give us an informational session on image and what is involved and what's entailed in becoming image certified for our vendors. So I'll be happy to start with the questions and see if anybody else has any others. Can you kind of tell us what it means to apply for image, and is there a time frame of when a company would become certified? Is it mandatory, voluntary? How does all that work?
An employer or business would choose to become image certified. It is a voluntary program. Usually they would ask for a presentation, at which point myself or another agent would go out and tell them what the image program is and how it will benefit their company specifically. Like I said, image is a mutual agreement, the mutual agreement between ICE and employers. Our goal is to focus our investigative efforts on companies that are committing egregious acts or repetitive violators on I-9 compliance. The way we can focus those efforts is by segmenting a group of employers, by not having to worry about them. By becoming our partner, we actually do an audit, and we work through discrepancies or problem areas that employer might be having with I-9s. We provide training. We provide assistance. We work with the employer so that they are doing what they're supposed to do. You know, I've been to several employers, and in some instances, they have a misunderstanding of what the right thing to do is. I've been to an employer who said, well, I don't want to have any problems, so I'm just going to hire folks who are, you know, U.S. citizens. That is not what they're supposed to be doing. We want to ensure that all persons, regardless of their nationality, who are eligible to be employed, are protected. Now, that means American citizens, obviously, but there are a huge class of immigrants and non-immigrants who are eligible to be employed in the United States. To simply say I'm going to hire all American is a discriminatory act. And believe it or not, that's not what we're here for. We want to ensure that all persons who are eligible to be employed are employed. And that comes through providing that training, that education to employers, and giving them the resources to do things the way they're supposed to.
Okay, so for our vendors, does that include other governmental agencies?
Yes, ma'am. We work with several governmental agencies. We have partners who are both public and private. You know, we value the privacy concerns of our partners. So if there is a company or a government entity that chooses to cooperate with ICE, but doesn't want that public, we honor that. You know, our agency deals quite a bit with access to information that not everybody else has. You know, like I said, we're an agency that was born of two separate agencies, immigration and customs. You know, on the customs side of things, we're privy to a great deal of proprietary information. So we have to ensure that the information of both the people that we investigate, that we partner with, that come into our purview is protected. And we do that on a day-to-day basis. So that carries over into image as well. So like I said, we have some public partners and some private partners, and we're willing to work with all our partners.
But as far as intergovernmental agreements that we have with the other cities in Cobb, or like our DOT projects or water projects may have be based on contracts with the state Department of Transportation, or would they have to be image certified to do business with us if they're another governmental agency?
We can't mandate participation in the image program. We highly encourage it. And to some degree, the image program is constantly changing to meet the needs of both the businesses, government, and immigration.
So that would be, if we were to pass an ordinance for our vendors to be image certified, we would have to have something in there that would exclude that or
Well,
address that.
I would recommend that your county attorney reach out and communicate with our Office of Principal Legal Advisor, because like I said, we can't mandate it.
Okay,
In the way that E-Verify is a system that was born of Citizen Immigration Services, another entity within the Department of Homeland Security, it's not mandated at the federal level. It's mandated by Georgia code, and the state of Georgia decided that, over a certain number of employees, that it's mandatory. That's not mandatory at the federal level. I think if you were to mandate participation or compliance with image, you'd have to have that conversation between the attorneys. I think there are ways to encourage participation, but a flat out mandating it, I think, is something for the attorneys to discuss.
okay. And also I've heard that identity theft, which is becoming a big problem, that image is another way of kind of a safeguard or an additional tool to help prevent that with the fake IDs and identity theft. Is that another benefit of being image certified?
One of the key benefits is that we are a partner agency. Human resources folks are not necessarily going to be experts on identity documents. We have tremendous resources with our forensic document laboratory and the training of our agents. We are willing to provide additional training in identifying fraudulent documents, altered documents. But as a partner, we want to work with an employer. If, say, your human resources department contacts me because we're partners in this, we have some suspicions on certain documents. I, as your partner, come to you and help identify if there are problems with those documents. I have access, or our agency has access to certain databases that your human resources folks might not have access to. Obviously, any concern about identity theft is a criminal matter, and we want to investigate that. So, yeah, we are there to be a partner, not just on the front end, but throughout our entire partnership with our partner businesses.
Okay. And this is a 2-year renewal process as well?
One of the changes, like I said, images is consistently being updated based on the needs of both government and the businesses that we partner with. Earlier this year, they changed the participation time frame from 2 years to 4 years. So as Cobb County is recertifying, instead of a 2-year span, it's now a 4-year span, which means that we're not going to be doing an audit for another 4 years. And a recertification audit isn't a complete audit. It's auditing what's happened in the time frame between the last audit and today.
Right, any additional employees would. So for a company to be image certified, do they submit the I-9s, the documentation to your office, or there's been concern that you could come in and audit their books? Well, this isn't anything to do with their finances, it's just their employees, citizen.
In part, that's not entirely accurate. When we conduct an I-9 audit or an inspection, we'll ask for, obviously, all the I-9s, any copies of supporting documents, but we'll also ask for financial records, because you could hand me 5 I-9s, claim to have 5 employees, but you could have 6 employees off book, which means there is going to be a financial trail. So we often ask for payroll. We ask for incorporation information. We ask for quite a bit of information. And we scour through all those documents and look for irregularities. Consistent payments that don't line up to a non-employee, that's going to be a clue that there's some improper hiring practices or employment practices. And those are going to be things that we would look at. The benefit of image is, instead of, like I said, a confrontational relationship where we come in and we're doing, I come in with a notice of inspection and a subpoena to say, provide me these documents within 3 days. Image is a voluntary program whereby you want to be involved. And we work with the employer both before, during, and after that initial audit. So you own business XYZ. You indicate that you want to be an image partner. I come, I tell you what the program is. And then we work together before we conduct our audit. And then once we're satisfied the things are where they need to be, then we'll conduct the audit. And we have already looked at the information beforehand. Now it's a formal notice of inspection and immigration subpoena, and we work through basically everything we've already worked through. You become image certified. And image certified means basically you've gone through an audit. We've addressed the discrepancies and whatever hiring practices led to those discrepancies, corrected those, and we move forward by continuing to provide training on the completion of the Form I-9s, certain hiring practices. And as we get new information with regards to identity documents or things like that, because the law does change. And as the law changes, we have to provide that training and information to our partners. That's our responsibility as your image partner. Like I said, it's not just on the front end, you want to be our partner and here's what we do and that's the end of it. My number is constantly going to get a phone call or an email, and I'm there, and that's my job, is to be there for the county, the business, the city, so that you get something out of it as well.
In 2011, we amended our purchasing ordinance to include a local vendor preference where businesses that are based in Cobb, have an office in Cobb, get additional points on their, when we do RFPs on a point system, if they're locally based, to give them an incentive for Cobb businesses to have an edge maybe over, the other factors of pricing and the criteria are all have to be met as well. But they get a few additional points for being a local Cobb County owned and headquartered or based business. Since this is voluntary, that may be a way we could go as far as our RFPs or bids. When we contract with counties, if they're image certified, they could get additional points. I mean, if it's voluntary, those that choose to do it would do it, and when they do bids or, proposals, they would get extra points. I mean, that's an option we could, as a board, we could consider as well. Okay, I'm gonna let everybody else ask their questions. But thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Other commissioners? Out of we have roughly a little over 13,000 businesses in Cobb County. Can you tell me, you have an idea, Ram, of how many businesses in Cobb County are image certified?
I couldn't, and like I said, we do value the privacy requests of certain partners. Right. I can tell you there are other municipal entities that are partners, and there are businesses within Cobb County that are partners.
Sure.
I could go back and I could look and see which ones are public partners. And
I don't need to have the names. I was just curious as the rough number.
I would say probably about a dozen to half a dozen.
Okay.
You do have a list on your website of the ones that are public.
Yes.
Chick-fil-A is image certified.
I was just curious. Okay. All right. Well, appreciate you coming today. We have no other questions, and so it's that simple.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And like I said, if you have any questions in the future, whether in this forum or another forum, we're your partner. So we want to be able to answer those questions.
And I believe we have a signing ceremony shortly in the near future for the recertification.
All right.
So I'm sure I'll see you again, Mr. Arnold.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Thank
thank you. Thanks for coming today and to your team also.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the second item today is Interim Director Kreider will present some options related to step and grade for our certified first responders.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners, and County Manager. Over the past few months, I've been meeting with County Manager finance director and HR director, and we've been working together to develop a step and grade pay structure for sworn public safety personnel. Our charge was to develop a plan that could be approved by the board and be ready for implementation starting October 1, 2020. The goal of this step and grade pay structure is to provide an additional attempt to retain and recruit sworn personnel. Before we get into today's presentation, I first want to acknowledge and express my appreciation for the recent actions that the board has taken as an attempt to retain and recruit sworn police, fire, and sheriff personnel. Coming this Friday, our sworn personnel will experience the reality of the 7% increase that was granted to them back in July. You also are paying the state firefighter monthly pension dues and the monthly POAB for law enforcement. We went from a 50% to 100% match up to 4% on the hybrid plan. And in July the 23rd, you also approved a retention and recruitment bonuses, and I have sent you guys a copy of the results of what has happened since July the 23rd, and there'll be some more conversation of that outside of this meeting. And I just want to say thank you for what you've done so far. But also over the past few weeks, we've met with each of you to explain how the step and grade framework could be implemented and how each employee would advance through the steps. We've also presented this proposal to the sheriff and his staff, and they agree with the proposal as well. Because we realize this step and grade pay structure may not be a final solution to our current challenges, we have scheduled individual meetings with each of you starting this afternoon to discuss other incentives for you as a board to consider. For this presentation today, we would desire that we place our focus solely on the step and grade portion of the challenge that we face. So looking at the presentation, it is going to be a 16-step plan. The calculations are, the steps are calculated on base pay. The step and grade would take starting pay from $41,615 to $45,776. There would be an just increase from lieutenant to captain within law enforcement from 10% to 20%. And this is an easy step. It's easy to follow for steps and promotions, and I'll explain that. Here you can see the different grades across the top. Grade 15 being an officer 1, grade 16 being an officer 2. In fire, that's when they end their 18-month probation. In PD, that's when they have completed their entire training phase, including their FTO, and they become an officer 2. And then you can see the different ranks as you go across the top of the scale. Going down vertically, there's a 3% increase from one step to the other step, and that's based on market control of that particular pay grade. So going from step 3 to step 4 under a sergeant, that additional money is the 3% of the market control for pay grade 19. Here we're going to do a hypothetical for you and talk about how the employee would actually enter the step and grade system, and then also how they would advance through the grades. First, let's talk about implementation and placing them in the grades. If you look over on the right, we're going to do a hypothetical of an employee currently making $54,000. And let me just say this, those steps do not represent years of service. Those are simply steps, okay? So that $54,000 earner under pay grade 16, if they're currently making $54,000, they would advance to $54,976 under the blue option. If they advance if you go to the yellow option, they would be placed in the step at $54,976 plus another step. Looking at advancement, if you look at that same officer 2, In step 5, if they were to make sergeant, they would just move straight across to step 5 under sergeant, and their pay would go from $54,976 to $62,375. If they work there 3 years and make it to grade 8, they would go to grade 8 in sergeant to lieutenant. They'd go from $68,000 to $77,950. That's how they would advance through the system. Our original plan is that we would be able to minimally, at a minimum, implement the blue plan come October 1, 2020. All of these calculations that we've considered is operating within the current budgets that exist today. Okay? So, let's say, for instance, we took the yellow option. That 54,000 earner would enter the system at 54,976 and advance to the next option of 56,818. We are 100% confident that we could do option blue October 1, 2020. We have a very, very strong feeling that we could do option blue March 1, 2020. And then based on revenues for the budget that would be created for 2021, we would hope that we could go to the yellow option in both police and fire. So, to make that simple, our recommendation would be to March 1, enter that given employee from 54,000 into the blue 54,976. Implementing the step and grade that quick would also put in place our starting pay increase, which would be attractive for new hires, and it would put the step and grade in place much quicker. So having said that, I'm going to have Tony and Bill to step forward and go to the last slide of the presentation. And if you have any questions after they're finished, we'll entertain those.
So I just want to add a couple more points to this, is that this is going to be, if this was approved, and this will be the first point in the next slide, this is a living document. So we wanted to give the board flexibility. So if there is a COLA issued, this table would adjust by that COLA. So that way this isn't a stagnant starting pay, is that COLA would not be reflected in the steps, but that would be something that the board considered to make adjustments as this table moves forward. So example, right now, if this were to approve today, starting salary would be $45,776. If we wanted to do a COLA to keep up with the market, this table would be adjusted by that COLA. So the steps would remain in place, but all the numbers would be, for example, if we did a 3% COLA, the table would be adjusted by 3% at the, at every step level. So the entry level as well as the maximum for each grade would be adjusted accordingly. And the officer would move accordingly. Yes, ma'am.
On that note, short of a COLA, if there is a merit at X%, how does that also impact the table?
So that would be a discussion of how we want to move forward, because this step plan would be in lieu of a merit, is how we would view this.
So their merit calculation would be different than that for employees generally? It wouldn't necessarily limit?
Yes, you are now looking at basically two pay plan options.
Okay.
So there could be, let's say, a merit for or non-certified and sworn that would not impact this table, and there could be a COLA that would be maybe across the board for the county or public safety. So the board would have discretion of how to adjust this table, as well as how to implement a pay increase for non-certified and sworn. And one of the things that Randy did mention is that the steps for this would be approved based on the budget every year that the board would have to set. So these are a plan of action and not necessarily set in stone. So that's one of the things that we want to keep in mind, is that although the step is a 3% of market control point, the board still has to allocate those funds to give that step. We've seen plenty of step and grade plans where if, in the midst of a recession, you don't do a step, and then I'll use the Board of Education, for example, coming out, you may see multiple steps to catch up. So this is something that the board will have to be aware of as if implemented, that, ideally we do a step every year, and that's great. And there's nothing limiting you to doing one step a year. You could do two, you could do none, but that's a conversation. But this is the plan and schedule of how we'd move forward, anticipating one step every year.
A lot of time and attention was given to how each cell was calculated. I'm observing that there are different percentage increases based on the step that you're in.
Yes.
I'm perceiving that it diminishes slightly over time, or I'm seeing a nod, and I'm seeing,
So
No, it is a calculation of the market control point of each one of the ranges, so that each step amount would be the same dollar amount as they move through the range.
okay, maybe my calculations are off.
are
and
you
looking-
talking between grades though, Commissioner?
Within a grade.
Okay, within a grade. Okay.
In other words, if you go from, if you look at pay grade 19, let's go to step 5, 62,375. If you multiply that times 3% of the market control for sergeant, you should get 64,465.
Okay, and that will be repeated through as you go down
Yes.
each step?
Yes.
Bill, can you explain this market control thing?
Yes, sir.
You want to explain what that is?
I'm going to actually let Tony explain the market control plan.
We call it market control point, Commissioner, but it's actually is the midpoint of the range,
Midpoint of whose range?
of the salary range. So we are still using the range, but we adjusted the minimum up for a police officer and then adjusted the rest of the ranges accordingly. So we kept the same distance between each grade.
The midpoint for the paying class that we did 2 years ago?
It
Is
has
that
been,
the
but it's been
midpoint
but with
range?
the new pay plan that just went in effect October 6th, that's been adjusted, so it's slightly a little bit
okay, I
higher.
got you.
Yeah.
So it's with the new raise,
Yes.
okay.
Okay, repeat to me what the percentage is between steps?
It's 3%. It's slightly, just a little bit higher than 3% because it's a rounded number to make each step be at the same dollar amount.
And the reason, excuse me, the reason that we did what we did in law enforcement for lieutenant to captain, we've had a challenge attracting captain candidates because lieutenants give up their ability to make overtime because captains are key managerial.
All right, Ed,
One second. Commissioner Burrow?
So the 3% increase each year is automatic with this plan or not?
It's not automatic because it still has to be approved by the board. So at the end of the day, the plan would be to do a 3% per the step and grade plan. But again, no matter what pay plan you approve here, the board has to allocate those dollars. So
Okay.
if you don't allocate those dollars, there's no step. And that was one of the points I was trying to make earlier. Looking back at like the Board of Education as an example of a step and grade, they have steps every so often, but when it's time for your step and the board doesn't allocate those funds, you don't get that step. But that's why this is something of a conversation. Like, let's say next year, let's say this is implemented, and the board decides, okay, the monies are tight, we're in a recession, we don't implement a step. Coming out of the recession, there's nothing preventing you from doing additional steps to catch up. So this is a conversation, and this is a document that even though you have a plan, if the funds aren't there, the board is the only one who has the ability to set that budget and approve that step. So it's gonna come down to prioritization of what do you like to see in the budget? And do we continue with the steps? Because, and honestly, it's no different than the merit, other than here's a proposed schedule, but you
Right.
have to set that and approve the budget to fund it.
Okay, so what if, this is for sworn police, fire, and sheriff.
Yes, ma'am.
What if, like this year, all employees got a 4%?
Sure,
This is a 3%.
correct. So,
But let's say that they get this every year. Let's just say they're gonna get it every year. What if the other employees get 4%? Can we add the 1% to this?
yes, so what we would ask you to do is do a COLA first and adjust the table, and then give the step. So you have the options, that way you're adjusting entry-level pay for new officers. Everybody would move the 1%, and then you could give the additional step beyond that. So yes, you can keep those in line, or you can keep those separate. And that's why having two pay plans gives you the flexibility between doing the step and grade within public safety certified and sworn versus non-certified and sworn employees.
Commissioner Ott?
All right. Since you said that the steps are not based on years of service,
Correct.
and you said that the steps are not automatic, the board has to approve them. And since we have a problem with retaining officers, I don't see how this is any different than what's currently in place, because this is a step and grade pay scale, but we have a pay and class pay scale, which has similar boxes with numbers. I mean, there is no difference. It's just a different set of numbers. And then the fact that the only way that you move up a step is by the board basically giving the officers a raise, how's that any different? How is that going to, and this is sorry, Randy, but this is your question. How is that going to change our retention problem if every year the officers have to wait for the will of the board to decide if they get a raise?
Well, me personally, am not gonna take it on myself to force the board to do something that the board may not wanna do. This gives you a structure to approve, but I can't come in here and say, if you approve this, this is automatic every year.
But how is this structure, well, I guess where I'm getting at, if we were to put up the pay in class, how's the structure any different? Because my understanding is where the officers or any of the employees got put in with pay in class, they got put in the midpoint, the mid-range, and we keep hearing these same terms over and over, Tony's terms, sorry, Tony, but you're in the midpoint. And people move from those grades or stuff. I mean, we have a different term for them, but I mean, basically, I don't really see the difference. Without without an automatic increase based on years of service or something, I don't really see how this is different than pay in class.
Well, because the pay in class is a one-time thing, this would be the expectation we would do this annually. That's the
Well,
difference.
I understand it's an
And that's driven by whoever
expectation,
writes the budget. And-
right? But under pay in class, there is an expectation that the commissioners could raise the numbers in pay in class.
Yeah, except that was across the board for all
I
employees.
just do not see, without some sort of automatic step increase, I do not see how this is a whole lot different than pay in class.
Because we do not want to put automatic, because then you're imposing a mandated pay.
I understand why you don't want to put it in there, Mr. Chairman. I'm just saying, I don't see that it's any different.
Well, I think there's a public perception here. First of all, our firemen and policemen are looking for some kind of a program that they can look at and rely on, okay? They've been talking about this. We've been talking about this. This is a proposal to address their concern. Second of all, we know we have to do something here to continue to provide incentives. This is another one of the many steps we're doing. Third of all, it creates the expectation on the part of the board to follow a process rather than doing what the step and grade did, which was sort of like, the perception was we're one and done, all right? We didn't follow through on it. This one finally gives a structure that we're not one and done. We're gonna address a very specific need involving public safety, involving certified officers, and whether the board chooses to do it or not, we have the flexibility to say yes or no, but that comes back upon the board to decide how to do that. That's all I'm saying.
Well, first of all, this step one for Officer One is 3% higher than the mid-range now, correct?
That's because this hasn't been implemented yet.
I'm saying, he's saying what's the difference of the paying class, mid-range, and the schedule? They're already getting a 3% increase at the first step of what the mid-range is now. When this is implemented, it'll be a 3% higher than what the mid-range is now, correct?
Yeah, but remember, this,
Bill, is that correct?
So, yes,
It
ma'am, we're going
is.
from 41,000 and change to 45,700.
Yeah.
So, I
Right.
mean, that was one of the goals of this, is to address the recruitment for the officers.
exactly.
And each
everything
one of
else.
these steps is another 3%
Yes, ma'am.
each year.
Because remember,
Okay.
the step and grade was 2 years ago. So what happened was we did it, and then all our friends around us raised their compensation. So we're just playing catch up. That's why the 2 years ago was like a lifetime. We need to look at the current reality. The current reality is we heard very loud and clear from the public that we need to do something to incentivize our officers to stay here. This is one of those steps to do that. Second thing is they wanted a very specific approach to this incentive. This is that. So I don't expect it to solve every problem, but the nice thing about this program is if you look at over time, we finally get the compensation to the levels that makes us so competitive, nobody else wants to rate our people anymore. So we don't fix it overnight, we fix it over time. And by fixing over time, hopefully we have the credibility, the board has the credibility to convince our officers, okay, they've adopted it, and I believe they're gonna follow through on this informal commitment to increase our compensation on an annual basis. And every year when it comes time to address this, short of a major recession, I think they're gonna understand that, we will step up to the plate and do the right thing. That's my argument. I can't guarantee it. I haven't taken a poll with the police officers and the firemen. But I think that what we've done over the last 2 years shown that we hear them. It's just taken time to come out of where we were. And this is another example of our commitment to rectify a known situation involving compensation.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, go ahead. You haven't asked any questions yet, so I can, okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Can you help me understand how this is performance-based versus budget-based? Do we determine the amount that would be budgeted for this based on how performance is assessed? Or do we determine there's a set pot of funds and then a percentage based on performance would be calculated from whatever X amount is per the budget?
Performance will be considered in this STEP program. If someone has an unacceptable performance, they won't get a STEP.
Okay. So when you're determining, I guess, the aggregate amount that's needed for the program, is it just determined on what we say we have, whatever bucket of funds we have available? Or will you say, based on the performance of these employees over this time frame, based on the 3% that we calculate per year, this is how much would be needed to fund, this would be needed to fund a STEP?
Yes, ma'am.
for our
What we'll do is we'll take the officers that are currently employed, and we'll calculate 3% step based on that.
Based on 3%?
Based on all the officers.
Getting
And if there was
3%.
an officer or
Okay.
officers that did not meet that criteria, they simply wouldn't be given the step, but we have to budget assuming they will.
Okay,
So that's just gonna be the difference, is we'll always budget higher to assume everybody gets it.
I see.
And assuming, let's
Okay.
say we have one or two that don't, then they simply wouldn't be allocated.
In that scenario, could an officer get more than that 3%, or are they, okay,
Not unless the board approves something above one step. So if
Okay.
you approve 2 steps, yes. But if you approved 1, that would be the limitation. Or you approved a step and a COLA, that would be giving additional options. So the board does have options, but assuming that we just follow the step plan, it would be a 3% every year.
okay, very good.
Okay.
Another question, the starting pay at step 1, grade 15, I guess step 1 for officer 1, I presume that number has been benchmarked on starting officer pay in the metro area?
I dare to say that it is above the top, but I think it's much more competitive.
Than our current?
Yeah, I mean, you have
Starting salary.
jurisdictions that are starting officers out 50 plus, but obviously this takes us to a much different place than 41,
And what's the time frame typically between officer 1 and officer 2?
18 months.
18 months, okay.
Next slide, please.
Commissioner Gamble?
Okay, I'm gonna kind of go in a different direction, as you guys are expecting, right? Okay, because from the conversations I've heard, the stepping grade is also supposed to kind of help make everybody more equal, right? But if I look at the information that was provided by the chairman on May 7th, I can find since lieutenants seem to be an issue, a police lieutenant that is making $84,000. And then I can go down and find another police lieutenant who is making $86,000. However, the lieutenant that's making the 86 was actually hired 8 months after the one making 84. So I know this has been an issue as well. But if we go back to your chart, the way it was explained to me is essentially that you would take their base salary and then put them wherever they would be closest fit in the step, where it didn't have to do with years. Kind of my understanding of how we've gotten to this difference is when they're at the top of the pay range and how merit is given if they're at the top of their pay range. So what is the policy on how merit is applied if you are at the top of your pay range? And so my question is instead of doing a step in pay, do we need to look at that policy so that way if an officer is at the top of their pay range, they would still be eligible for that merit? Too many questions?
Currently, the compensation policy the board has provides that anybody in the county that reaches the top or is at the top of their range, they would get the amount that they would normally get in merit, but it's provided in quarterly payments to them through that year. So it doesn't add to their base pay, but they still get a pay amount that's considered a one-time payment to them.
But they still get that 4% merit. It's not like they're excluded, it's just paid in a different fashion.
It's paid in a different fashion. It does not increase their base pay. So the next year, it wouldn't continue. It would just pay for those quarterly payments for that year.
And so since it doesn't improve their base pay, then of course it impacts their pension and retirement.
It would not impact their pension and retirement because it's a one-time payment. Only their base pay would be affected there.
Right, but if their pension is on their base pay, and if
Yes.
we're not increasing it,
That's correct.
that's the impact to their pension. Okay.
Commissioner, just to add to that, again, with this table, you're increasing the maximum for all these ranges as well. So that should help alleviate some of that, at least for a time being. So if you have an employee who maybe is at grade 16 that's at the max now, we're increasing those because we increased the starting pay for Officer 1. All these ranges will have been adjusted accordingly. So you're going to have some now freed up room at the top end as well, where officers will be able to expand. If they're at the max today, they won't be at the max necessarily tomorrow. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but going back to this document that I received in May, we've got a lot of employees looking at their base salary that would essentially be fit in at the number 16 step.
Sure. And
So again, how is this gonna benefit them if their salary doesn't increase after the 16th step?
because right now, if you're in that range, you shouldn't be at step 16 because we've expanded the range out. So what we looked at, and I think Commissioner Ott kind of alluded to this a little bit, if you do it based on years of service, especially when you get to the top end, like lieutenant, captain, major, and so on, so many of those employees have been here 16 plus years, so you're taking everybody and putting them at the max. So that's actually going to create more issues than if you place based on salary today. And that allows them to have additional steps as they progress versus saying, okay, let's say you have a captain who's been here 16 years, they may be 1 year as a captain, they're automatically going to the max of a captain. Versus, let's say, hypothetically for a captain, you're making 90, you're going to go to step 6, and then you still have several years of progression left in there. So we wanted to give this as a progression table, and that's one of the reasons we looked at years of service. That did not allow for that. You'd had so many, especially at the top end, based on years of service, go to the max of the grade, and what we looked at is the increases for officers were dramatically different. If we look at blue option, the yellow option, that kind of puts the pay increases anywhere from 3 to 6%, which is what we're looking at for placement. So if you were to do the yellow option, the max increase that you could get based on placement would be 6%. The minimum would be 3. And if you do the blue option for placement, it'd be, basically, a very minimum increase up to 3%. But then as Randy said, if you do the blue option in March and then do the step in October, you're going to spread those out and you can implement a little bit earlier. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. So since you've done this, have you also then calculated the net impact to the pension?
That is actually on the next slide. So that's what we, if you go to the next slide.
But before we go to the next slide. So right now, we know that we have compression. Okay? I understand, and we've talked about this, we need that. In a perfect world, if you were starting out here, you don't have compression because you have these steps and all that stuff, but we have compression, okay? Explain how officers and firefighters are going to be placed to fix the compression problem that we have. How does this, I understand in a perfect world, somebody starting up at grade 15, step 1, going through it, there is no compression in their entire career. But we have a whole lot of people that are already in a compression situation. How does this fix that?
Over a long time.
So in other words, it doesn't.
That's right.
Okay.
And in order to do that, you're gonna be looking at significant funding.
Well, but I think it's important because compression has cost this county $3.5 million a year with the however many sheriff deputies and police officers we had to fix. How, I mean, I don't see moving forward how that, I mean, how does that not happen with, let's just say we got somebody who's a sergeant in, so they're grade 19, step 6, and now they become a lieutenant. Are they going to be making more than somebody else who's already a lieutenant? You know, basically the result of compression in the past.
So we kind of talked about this as we go forward. So as Randy said, this is not something that is going to be fixed immediately, but it will be fixed over a period of time, a long period of time.
Yeah, but the pension's gonna be fixed over 30 years. That's a pretty long
Right,
time.
this is a long time. So as you said, as a new officer grade 15, step 1 coming in, you're going to have no compression.
Totally get that. Somebody
Right.
coming on property
So-
to start,
So
not a
we look-
problem.
We looked at this from a couple different perspectives. If we do it based on years of service, it actually creates more compression. If we do it based on salary, it doesn't create more compression. It doesn't solve the problem today.
I'm not sure I would agree with how the years of
So-
service creates more compression, but,
Well, because again, we're moving so many to the max. So
well, no, I get that
So
part.
That part, okay. All right, but with this one is if you're compressed, it doesn't make the matter worse. All it does is allow you to spread that out over the remaining years of service. So you're not going to create a bigger issue, but you're going to be able to spread it out over a period of time. So as you have officers transition out, again, the officer 1 starting today, you're not going to have that. So you're going to have this over a long period of time without a doubt. And that was the kind of the conversation that we had about how do we do this without making this worse? And you're right. If you have an officer promoted, you may create an equity issue that you may have to resolve. But that's going to be in place today, whether you do this or not.
Well, I get the part that it's in place today. That's why I keep saying I don't see how this is different. All right, so we're losing officers in the 3 to 5 year range.
Sure.
Okay? Randy, you know what I'm gonna ask?
I preface my conversation by additional incentives. We'll talk to you this afternoon. I don't want to muddy the water
That
in
would
here.
be, no, that would be my question as to, and I understand that this 54,976, since we keep talking about the blue square, that's a 5-year person. How does that compare, that number, to the jurisdictions like Sandy Springs and Brookhaven and other places where we are losing officers to?
I don't think it's as much that number as it is their retirement.
Okay?
I mean, for example, you go to Sandy Springs, they're gonna give you 12%. They're gonna match you up to 5, 12 and 10, 22%.
Right, no, all right, I understand we've got a lot of different areas to look at, but my question is, the bottom line is, yes, pension is important, but the bottom line is people look at what they get in the paycheck every 2 weeks. Okay, so I'm just kind of curious, since I know we're losing officers between the 3 and 5 year timeframe, where does those numbers in this table, which is the table we're being asked to look at, whether it's the blue or the yellow, it doesn't matter, because the colors only determine which step you get placed in. Does this address that portion of the retention problem?
Well, I think it's one of those things, just like when we give 7%, we match 4, we do POAB, we do state pension.
Right, well,
It's a wait and see. I mean, none of us have a
Well, no, but I
crystal
mean,
ball to look into and say, this is exactly what we gotta do to
All right,
make
well,
it
let
work.
me restate my question then. What I'm asking is, has anyone looked at, is this number for the pay portion competitive with the time frame of officers that we are losing? Because if this number is way less, then it's accomplishing nothing. If it's in the ballpark, okay, it doesn't have to be higher than all of them, but if it's not in the ballpark of being competitive with where we're losing officers to, then it doesn't do anything for us. Because we can train officers all day long, all year long, but that costing us infinitely more dollars, as you and I have talked about, than it is to retain an officer, which is why
Sure.
future discussions, like in a couple hours, will
Right.
be about other things. But you know, if the base numbers in the pay table aren't competitive, then we've accomplished nothing. Just increased our costs.
And I will say this, no other way for me to say it other than we worked within the confines of the current budget to put this together.
I understand that, and I'm working with you here. Trying to
So
make
I
a
think
few
the
points
things
here.
that, I think the things that we're gonna be discussing with you and Commissioner Cupid later today are gonna be some other things that you may be excited about. We don't pretend to have all the right answers, but we're at a point to where we gotta make some different decisions than we've made in the past, because there's a word for that, expecting different results and doing the same thing is insanity. And so, we're at a place to where I sent you guys the email on what has happened since, July. And we netted 3 employees from July the 23rd to today. If that McEachern math of mine's right, that's 12 a year. That's 7 years for us to catch up. So again, we don't have a crystal ball to look into to say, is this gonna do it? Is other incentives gonna do it? We don't know that. All we can do is take our best effort and see what happens, and if it doesn't work, we adjust. I mean, I don't know how to say it any plainer than that. So that would be our recommendation, but I think the part of implementing this in March versus October would be huge for recruiting by taking that salary from 41 to 45 and placing people in the grade on top of the 7% they just got. And in the meantime, we try to look for incentives and have those discussions with you guys.
Right, and I don't disagree, but my point is that training costs are astronomical compared to retention costs.
Absolutely, and I'm putting those numbers together now on what it cost us to train. And I'm afraid it's gonna be more than what the bonus is that we may be anticipating. I mean, I'm just
No,
being,
absolutely. I mean, I
I'm
don't
just
even
being
need-
open and
I don't
honest
even
with
need to do
you.
the math, and I guarantee you that the training costs are gonna be much higher than a potential bonus or, you know, a re-signing bonus, so to speak.
And the reality of it is, you know, we all deal with what we face, what we see in front of us. It's kind of like measuring prevention. You can't really measure that, but I think it's a time where we sit down and we say, okay, from the time we started recruiting this officer until that officer reaches the completion of their training period, here's what it's costing us. And if we consider that as an incentive to bring people here, I guarantee it's going to be significant.
Yeah, but the incentive I'm talking about is, let's not talk about the training costs. Let's talk about how much can we save by offering that public safety personnel in the 3 to 5 year that's leaving because of greener pastures on the other side of the fence. I guarantee you that number is not as big as that training cost. That number that would potentially keep them here. And it may be a combination of salary and some of the other things you talked about, but I think the cost to train and the time that you have a beat not covered while you're training somebody, there is a huge cost associated with that. Whereas a potential retention bonus or whatever you want to call it, bonus, you know, whatever we can or cannot call it, I think that number is a lot smaller than that training cost. And I think, and you and I have talked about it, and I know
Sure,
we're going to
and
talk.
I agree with you. Where we may have some difference in opinion is focusing on a 3 to 5 year officer. I know what it's like to affect morale in a negative way in law enforcement and police. And the last thing we want to do is affect morale and only address those times where people are leaving, because there's other people here that's on the old retirement plan that we obviously are not going to leave, but there are also others on the new retirement plan who we just lost a 13-year person. I know that's not the
Right, I mean, and we've talked about that, I mean, and obviously, you know, you gotta, there's only so many fingers that you can plug the holes in the dam with, and the biggest one right now appears to be the 3 to 5. And so we gotta stop that bleeding first. You know, it's kind of like, you know, when you get to the ER, you gotta do triage and they gotta treat the most serious thing first. I mean, if you lose a patient overall, that's no good. But at the same time, you gotta, you know, we gotta look at the most serious problem first and then go back, which I think some of these other things that are being discussed are important for that.
Sure.
But we gotta stop the, you know, the hemorrhaging right now.
I agree. And that'll be what our focus will be on in our conversations this afternoon.
One other thing, I know you were mentioning pension and pay in other areas. One other thing that I think we've forgotten here in Cobb County is what the county did for our health and medical benefits for our insurance. The county did not increase the health insurance payments for the employees. The county essentially paid that on their behalf. So that was anywhere from a 4 to 5% savings to the employee. In addition to, there was no increase to the employee contribution for the dental premium as well. So when we're sitting here looking at other jurisdictions and how they're paying, are we also taking this into account? Because again, healthcare, we know, is a huge cost to individuals.
I think the people we would need to ask that question to are those that are leaving. You know, did they consider that? Bottom line is, it's kind of like I tell the county manager, you know, and please know that I acknowledge what has been done already, and I said, thank you, thank you, thank you. But at the end of the day, we can talk about what we've done, but we've netted 3 officers since July 23rd, when we implemented some pretty darn good incentives in our eyes. But we're still losing almost as many as we're getting. So at the end of the day, my question to all of us is what are we willing to do to stop it?
I think you're dead on, and that's where we need your help, is to understand if the policy decisions we're making are going to be effective. You know, I shared my disappointment just the night where we approved the bonuses, and you know, we're being told that that's the right thing to do, and I overhear officers saying, you know, before coming in, that this was not going to be adequate. The same day we're voting on it. You know, these decisions that we're making are not insignificant decisions. They're going to impact the budget by $1 mil or $2 mil based on my rough calculations of these numbers. And at the end of the day, I'm hoping that what we do is going to be effective. And I know you're trying to moderate this step and grade program based off of our budgeting history, perhaps as a board, and where you think our appetite may be. But if it's not going to be effective, then again, we're putting $1 to $2 mil of worth of general fund towards something that may not get to the goal of recruitment and retention. So I look forward to our conversation, but I just hope that you will just be plain, and the officers will be very plain with us about whether or not this will be effective or not, because I think we all want to do what's right to retain. And if we end up putting this kind of program, and I want to thank you guys for putting this together. This looks complex, and I know it took a lot of time. But I would hate for us to put something forward and then we find out it's not effective. I mean, because again, once you start down this path, I can only see just costs growing if we find out that this doesn't work.
Well, and I think another thing that we still have to remember, y'all, is that the amount of, I don't mean this disrespectful, the amount of fish in the pond has severely decreased.
Okay.
And fishermen who catch the most fish have the best bait,
Okay.
whatever that looks like.
Whatever it looks like, yeah.
And that's what we're trying to figure out is,
Yes.
what does that look like?
Yes, and I know we've heard a lot about step and grade. And I'm just putting it out there because I just want my concerns or questions to be made public. I know, again, we'll have opportunity to address this privately and to see how we move forward. You know, again, we were being told we need a bonus, we need a bonus, we need a bonus, or we need something to, an incentive for our officers, and we're being told that that's the right thing to do. And even the amount of critique that we faced for doing this amongst, you know, one class of employee versus other, I would like to be able to know that there's some level of confidence that these decisions we're making are going to be commensurate with
Sure.
retention and
Sure.
recruitment. So and again, I'm just seeking for help, and I don't know the way to survey that, but that if we do this, that we can anticipate, that, this aligns with what officers are saying would be helpful, because we've been hearing it for over a year, 2 years now. Step and grade, you know. And then I'm hearing concerns from Commissioner Ott. I don't know if it's shared broadly, but I just hope that we're making a good decision, because this is gonna be a costly decision to the county. We're not gonna continue to see the same number of officers leaving the county.
Commissioner Cupid, I just want to clarify something here. And I want to, before I say this, what did you say you prefaced your remarks? I prefaced my remarks with the fact that y'all have done a lot of work trying to get to this within the confines that you were told you had to stay in. Okay, and we'll leave that at that part. Every step and grade that I have lived under, this is not step and grade. Okay, it's being called step and grade. It has steps down one side and grades across the top. This does not function like a step and grade does in any of the ones that I'm under at the military or my other job. A true step and grade, you get a raise every year based on years of service, and you then can get another raise by being promoted, all right? If the powers that be want to give you a raise, the numbers in the entire table change. So if it's a 3% raise, then every number in the table would go up by 3%. But this, and I said it earlier, I just see this fraught with problems just like paying class was. I don't see that it tells the officers, the firefighters, or anybody else that anything's going to be any different than it is today, because each year it requires the board to make the same decision that we're required to make today.
True.
And we know what's happened so far, and so a true
Okay.
step and grade does not require any action by the people paying the bills, because it automatically increases, and that's the incentive of a true step and grade. And I understand it costs a lot of money, okay? But the fact of the matter is,
If you're offering to make this guaranteed, I would appreciate it.
No,
That's what-
I am
That's exactly, but that's
no,
exactly.
my point is that
That's the point,
I
right?
want to make sure that all the commissioners understand, this is being called step and grade. It's not functioning like a step and grade. This is simply a pay table.
But for us saying that the steps are based on board approval, this could happen annually,
It could,
and
but then when you throw performance in there, now you've thrown another wrinkle into, I mean, remember, this is supposed to incentivize someone to say, okay, if I come to Cobb County as an officer one in my first year, I'm gonna make $45,776. And over the course of a 16 or 20-year career, I have some sort of guarantee as to what kind of money I'm gonna make. This doesn't do it. This is a pay table based on the 2020 budget. And so to know what you're gonna make in 2021, you gotta wait till the board decides what the budget is for 2021, which is fine, but don't call this a step and grade when it doesn't work like a step. It's the pay table.
So it's our understanding that we cannot obligate future boards to a commitment to this, which is why this does have to be approved every year. So when we look at step and grade through other municipalities, that's how they function, because the board sets the budget, and we can't approve this today and then obligate a board to 16 years from now to continue to do this 3% every
and the
year.
onus falls on us to make sure this is implemented. I mean,
Absolutely.
nothing is going to get us out of that obligation when it comes time to approve the budget. I mean, if this is something that we're committed to, then we show that by how we vote for it.
Correct.
So, I mean, again, I understand part of what Commissioner Ott is sharing. I have to understand a little bit more how performance ties into maybe an expectation of increase in pay per year if we were to implement this annually. But I can't see any other way around us having to approve this as a board.
Right.
When we approved the current budget, 2019, but 2020 budget, October 1, and there was you know, a step in grade presented at that time, the day before, or couple days before. And all we heard from the FOP and the firefighters union and command staff and everybody was, we need a step in grade. Well, we committed to that, I committed to it, and most of us up here that voted for the budget committed to looking at a step in grade and putting our options out there, and to me, that's what we're doing. To be able to, I guess the fact that it has to come back every year, because I understand the sunshine law that we can't bind a future board for 16 years, really for 4 years. It has to come back annually to approve. And all of our contracts and agreements have that calendar year clause in there that we can terminate at any time with a certain amount of days' notice or whatever because of that, because we can't bind a future board. I wouldn't have a problem making a commitment that we are going to do this, but I understand the legality of it having to come back every year.
And that, Commissioner, you're exactly right. That's essentially, and Commissioner Hott is right as well. This is essentially a plan, a pay table. It is ultimately up to the board to make that commitment to take the steps each and every year. And it's no different than our pension funding obligation. It's, you know, we have a 30-year plan of how we're paying that, but ultimately the board has to allocate those dollars to do so. If for some reason the board decides not to, then, you know, that it is what it is. And unfortunately, I think we would all love to stay and say, this is a commitment, it's a done deal, it'll happen every year. But again, as you stated, it has to come back every year for the board to approve. And it could be a commitment to say, we're going to do this over the next 5 years as a merit base only, as Commissioner Ott said, because that's essentially what this is going to be, is we're going to do a 3% merit of market control point for the next 5 years. Well, if you make that statement today and there's a recession tomorrow, that didn't mean anything, because you still have to allocate the dollars the next year for the budget. So this is just a plan of action is what it is. And if we take all the steps and the board is committed to the plan, this is what it would look like. But again, that's solely up to the board and how it votes at budget time.
So we have this, but when we're also tying it back to employee reviews and yearly reviews. In the IACP report, now granted, I know this is from 2016, it was stated in here that those involved with this process indicated that the time and effort the appraisal system demands is quite significant, and they questioned the value of the outcome of going through the exercise. So knowing that was reported in 2016, how are we going to address and change that in order to implement this and still be fair and present a different picture if we are totally going to be changing the compensation?
Well, obviously, I was not in a position then to read what you have in front of you there, but I think it's with anything. I think that could be somewhat isolated to whoever was interviewed, because I would not think that all of our employees feel that way. And the last thing that I would ever agree with is that we would reward someone for poor performance. I don't think that our citizens would agree that we reward someone for poor performance. And so if someone is not performing at an acceptable level and we put them on a plan to get them to a good place, maybe that'll incentivize them that, oh, wait a minute, everybody else got 3%, I didn't get anything. And so to hear that pull out of that report, Commissioner, I haven't been privy to that report because I wasn't in.
Okay, well, I'll send it to you, because again, to me, because we know the pay has been an issue for decades now.
Mm-hmm.
So this also, to me, is part of that. And again, if we're gonna fix the pay, we need to fix how we do reviews so that, again, it's clear to everyone.
And
the
I don't know why this blew right over my head. We just revised in police and fire on the sworn side a brand new evaluation form. And it is now more specific and focused on the individual performance duties and not as generic as the prior performance appraisal forms.
And Commissioner Gambrill, I was going to mention, when Director Heaton and Tony Hagler and I sat down and kind of went over the parameters, it was in response to the 2016 report. That was a very good observation that you made. And that's one of the things that we did. Not only did we try to shorten up the form and make it a little bit more specific, but we also tried to make adjustments to deadlines that would be a little more workable, particularly on the public safety side.
And I would be curious to reach back out to our supervisors, all of our employees after this and say, hey, now let's do a review of what this past performance appraisal system, how did you feel about it? And we can do that internally.
And it'd be fun to hear the results.
Yes.
Or the feedback.
Yes.
Randy,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, did you have something, Lisa? No? You're meeting with all of us this week to go over this, and any input that anyone has as far as a suggestion or different plan or what have you, will we be privy to that as well?
We're going to be coming into those meetings, listening as much as we talk.
Okay,
We're looking for ideas that you all could buy into, that we collectively think would be a solution to our challenge. You guys are a big part of the process. I mean, no matter what we put together, if you can't agree and vote on it and approve it as a board, then we're spinning our wheels. So why would we not do that on the front end?
Right.
So that we have your input, we have your ideas, we collectively think, okay, we're at a place now to where we feel like this is going to impact us in a positive way. Let's implement it and see what happens. I mean, like I said, none of us have that crystal ball that we can look into and say, this is exactly what we can do to keep and attract officers and firefighters. And we don't have that luxury. So I think collectively, as we have our meetings with you all, absolutely our ears are going to be open and we're going to listen as much as we talk.
and also, are you meeting with your command staffs
Already have?
and getting input from them as well? Because I'd
Yes.
like to hear from them as well.
Yes.
Okay,
And we'll have more as we move forward, because it's kind of like we have discussions with y'all, we take it back to command staff. We have discussions with them, we come back to y'all, and that's the way it should work.
all right, okay. Are there any other questions? Any other input?
Got one more slide.
Oh,
Sorry. This is the last one, I promise.
I
Okay.
thought we were done.
So Commissioner Gambrill asked about this. So one of the things we want to discuss in these meetings is obviously the table. How do you feel about the table? And we'll talk about that. And then obviously placement within the grade. Are we looking at, time frame of that? We talked about possibly as early as March of 20, October of 20, looking at that, as well as, is it just placement or is it placement plus step? So those are the conversations that we're going to be having going forward. Once we get a feel for where the board is on that and we kind of get a consensus, then we're going to calculate the impact on the pension fund. Because as we said earlier, if you do the placement based on just placed in the grade, it's 0 to 3% or minimum to 3% increase. That would be one set of numbers that we bring the actuaries and let them know this is what we're looking at. And also the time frame. Are we looking at it in March versus October? So those are going to move the numbers a little bit. So once we get a feel for where the board is, then we're going to bring those to the actuaries and give you an idea of, hey, this is going to be the impact on the annual required contribution as well as the funding ratio, because anything we do with the salary increases obviously has an impact. But we want to make sure you have all that information before a final decision is made. So that's kind of where we're headed. But again, it's going to be a lot of back and forth as we have these conversations to find out, this is our starting point for discussion today. It doesn't mean that's where we're going to end up. So we just look forward to those conversations, and we'll keep the board in the loop as we have conversations with each commissioner. We promise to follow back up with you all so we can build a consensus and get something moving forward. Okay. Anybody else?
So you were going to show us a slide on how it was going to impact pension, or no?
Not until we know which implementation we're going to do. So, because like I said, if we just do placement within the grade, that's 1 to 3% increase in salaries, which would have one impact on pension. And if we do placement plus step, you're looking at 3 to 6. So that's going to have a more significant impact on pension. So because we have to pay to have those numbers run, we'd like to do it one time and then versus ask them to do it both ways. So, and in worst case scenario, we do it one way and that's not something that's palatable. We can run it again at the other option. So, but we prefer to try to do it one shot, save a little bit of money. But, you know, and where we may end up may be something completely different than what was presented today. So we want to get your feedback before we pay to have those calculations run. Okay. Thank you.